Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to my talk, Finding Shade in the Hot Zero-Day Summer. Show of claps, how many of you enjoyed CypherCon? Show of claps. Yeah, usually when I go to talks, people ask to raise your hand or they want participation and they don't get it, so I figured clapping's a little bit easier. Did anyone go to the casino night last night? Yeah, so did I, and I got about 4 hours of sleep, so I'm a little tired, so if I mess something up, please forgive me. All right, so I'll start off with who am I? I'm Matthew Hoerger. I'm a principal threat researcher at Google on the Mandiant side of things. I started at Mandiant about 3.5 years ago. Before that, I worked in the retail space as a threat intel analyst and also did some Linux admin engineering work. I actually started my career as an automobile mechanic. I was master mechanic, and I did that for 8 years before switching into cyber, which is a fun fact. I earned my OSCP certification last November, and I'm a pro hacker on Hack the Box. Some of my interests, I like grilling, in particular smoking things, brisket, pulled pork, stuff like that. Enjoying craft beer, talking about security things, doing CTFs, like all that cool stuff. And I also like talking about aliens a lot. I get that at work a lot. Everyone knows to don't bring up anything about aliens because then Matt's going to go on these conspiracy theories during our meeting, and we don't have time for that. Just finished reading a really good book called American Cosmic by Diana Walsh. It's about aliens, technology, and religion. So if you're into that kind of stuff, like Matrix and Neo and all that, you'll like that one. All right. So day in the life, discuss a little bit about what I do at Mandiant. I am on the Mandiant security validation team. My main focus is creating content for the MSV platform. MSV platform is just a platform that allows customers or any users to test their security controls with real-world attacks or different kind of exploits and things like that. We mainly focus on trying to align with Mandiant intelligence. So if Mandiant saw some stuff, we want to make sure we have content to back that up right away. I originally started working in malware where I was doing a lot of dynamic analysis, trying to get down to some of the more atomic behaviors that malware performs, and then put that in some kind of sequence that customers can test in their own environment. The research that I do also helps other teams at Mandiant. We're all under Intel, and sometimes whoever kind of does the research first, that kind of trickles down to the rest of the teams. So other teams use some of our content on the platform to either test their current detections or write new ones. I mostly stand up vulnerable infrastructure and try to attack it with publicly available exploit code. Sometimes I create POCs when necessary, but not all the time, as we have a quick turnaround rate for things and we kind of jump all over the place. And yeah, like I said, sometimes I fake infrastructure to capture exploit attempts. So how many of you have heard of the hot zero-day summer or heard that term? Yeah, it's a good one. We like saying things like that, especially on my team, kind of keep morale up on the team during horrific things in this industry. Definitely has a lot of reasons to get you down. So in 2023, this is actually some reporting from Mandiant and Google, there was 70 zero-day exploits were disclosed between January and September, which is a 56% increase. Let's see. So yeah, so like I mentioned, the hot zero-day summer is hilarious. I did want to mention one of my coworkers just recently came up with a funny thing, and I saw Fortinet's a vendor here, and I hope no one out there is Fortinet, but we had a lot of Fortinet vulnerabilities come in, and he dubbed the phrase a series of unfortunate events. I had that in here, so I had to make sure I say that and not forget. It was a good one. All right, so in my job, I came across a problem. How can I demonstrate exploitation when I do not have enough information or even access to vulnerable software? I was pretty much waiting around to get burned, like Will Ferrell there. Because of the influx of vulnerabilities being disclosed, there was a high demand for MSV content focusing around vulnerabilities. Found myself in a very reactive state, trying to focus on creating this type of content that customers wanted. Most of the time I was waiting around for a POC to drop. By the time it dropped, I felt like I was behind things, and I could have been a lot quicker or learned more about this when the POC came out. So Something that I saw is early disclosure data is usually pretty limited and not almost like incomplete, and for a reason. They don't want to let too much information out there and have attackers see that right away or threats see that and come up with their own stuff. Some of the things I asked myself is, can I predict the weather? Can we use this disclosure data and patches to discover attack patterns to help us anticipate where threat actors might be focusing on? Can I create content before a POC is dropped? Is there a way to create or refine detection rules for limited information? And lastly, can we use this information to perform some proactive threat hunting? And the answer to all that was yes. I'm not saying it's actionable data, but it's actionable data. Any Ancient Alien fans out here? Like I mentioned, I love aliens. I love the show Ancient Aliens, so had to include that. All right, how do we do this? How do we navigate the data desert? I'm going to call Twitter, not X, just because I'm so used to it. But part of my day-to-day is I monitor Twitter feeds. 90% of the time, it's how I learn of a new hot 0 day or just even a new hot vulnerability in general. Log into Twitter, start seeing what the chatter is about, and then I kind of know where I want to start my week or start my day. I mainly try to focus on any kind of intel that's actionable. This means doing maybe some patch analysis, reverse engineering fixed data to reveal any kind of flaws. Sometimes we're able to view source code or decompile things enough that we can learn what a patch is doing to the software, mapping the attack surface, which area of the software is at risk. Learning about what areas of the software at risk kind of helps out, like tune in where you should be paying attention to. Looking for code clues. Sometimes the CV description will give us little clues on what areas of the software are vulnerable, like maybe a specific endpoint and what type of attack is the software vulnerable to, like maybe SQL injection or remote code execution. Knowing that little bit of details definitely helps you kind of figure out what you're looking for as you sift through all this data and try to look for anomalies. Or you get a bunch of data, you have normal requests coming in. Well, those requests sometimes shouldn't have SQL queries in there or some kind of injection attempt. One of the main things that I look for is having a POC. It's kind of like the full oasis. Having the POC code will allow us to explore the full extent of the vulnerability, what systems are effective, and how difficult it is to exploit. Right. Applying the sunscreen. As a defender, there's a lot to monitor. I know this from my work in the SOC. This type of zeroing in on things, like zeroing in on exploit potential. Patches and disclosure often address vulnerabilities most likely to be exploited. Studying a patch or disclosure tells you what attackers might be interested in. Identifying targets. Patches reveal which area of the software contains a vulnerability and gives insight to what areas the threats are focusing on. So I don't know if you've noticed sometimes when you look up a CV in the description, they'll give you a little endpoint / like MIFS or / this API or this just this endpoint. That kind of gives you an idea of where you should start focusing your detections on and looking for those anomalies. Predicting attack techniques, reverse engineering patches often reveal the nature of the vulnerability, whether it's injection, deserialization, directory traversal. And I'm going to go through all of these and kind of give some tips and tricks that I learned or the ways that I kind of go about things. It is kind of high level because this is sometimes some heavy stuff and you can dig as deep as you want to go. So yeah. So the first vulnerability I'm going to talk about is the move it transfer vulnerability. I worked on this one last year. And this one, like the description says, is an SQL injection that we can use the patch data to kind of like figure out which area of the software is vulnerable, what did they do, what did they change. So let's see, sorry. So move it transfer software is mostly .NET. This helps a lot because we can decompile some of that with .peek. When we do that, and I'll share the code in the next slides here, but we reveal that a function was completely removed. This function is used by one endpoint, and that's machine2.aspx. Machine2.aspx, after looking through the code, is only called internally and can't be interacted with remotely. Still, it's something we should keep an eye out. We know this is an injection vulnerability from the initial details, and we can see that there are changes made to an SQL query. It's that users get users with email addresses. This is used in several places throughout the software, and looking through the code, we see that guest access.aspx has a path to the SQL found in this function and can be accessed remotely through function calls. So here's the function that was removed, and one thing I want to note is that I'm constantly looking at different software all the time, and I don't always have the time to kind of like understand maybe fully like what this is, or like, you know, I can't learn every language or be very efficient at every single language, so I like to cheat a little bit and just kind of see what I need to see only and kind of run with that. So I know this is removed. I know that machine2.aspx interacts with this, so that's kind of important. And then here's that other function where a bunch of SQL queries were changed. Just kind of have some arrows there. That's the diff that I ran against that. And just knowing that's what was changed will help out a lot. And I'll show how that'll help out on creating rules, detections to start doing some hunting or even testing our own detections. So SPF 50, getting some sunscreen on there. Like I mentioned, the machine2.aspx and guest access.aspx are two endpoints that interact with the newly patched functions. We can use these to create or tune our own detections. Having this starting point on where to focus, we can get creative with our detection rules or queries we make. We can use these as a starting point for threat hunting. This type of hunt will help us determine if there's already been exploitation or if there's any new attempts, or pretty commonly, I know when a CV comes out, maybe a couple days later, this happens a lot, where someone will bypass the original vulnerability and now a new CV comes out. If you were just sitting there, you patched and you didn't do anything else about it, you're kind of left there just to wait around and get burned, like I mentioned. At least having like a general idea of where you should be looking for anomalies will help you prepare for that. You might even catch that, and you know, you'd be the one reporting the CV that you're seeing exploited in the wild. There's some simple snort rule, Yara rule, basically looking for any type of SQL injection or any kind of SQL queries. In this case, I use like select and union, just common queries, and then focused on those two endpoints there, the guest access and the machine2.aspx. So if any of those endpoints get hit and we see a select or union query, we'll know to alert or at least get our attention. So once we have those written, you know, wait around, we're doing our own testing, we're looking for anomalies, a POC gets dropped. That's great, that was like the full oasis. So having a confirmed working POC allows us to validate that our detections and our vendor detections work. We can run the exploit code, capture the traffic. PCAP's gonna be used either like locally to check snort rules. You can even maybe run the exploit code over your network in a controlled environment and see if anything got triggered or if your rules got triggered. And then, yeah, so I did have a link here for the exploit code here, but I'm on a Chromebook and I wasn't doing a good job of like getting this working in the beginning, so I'm not gonna try to click the link, but maybe at the end I'll go back and click on it. Basically in this POC code, what I wanted to show is that a new endpoint is revealed, and it's this move it API. Not knowing anything about that in the beginning, we now have something to go with. So we run that exploit code, there's like a little code snippet there, and we get some data. I hope you can see that. So there's two post requests there. We can see the new endpoint up there making the request to the DLL, and then this is just from running the exploit. I was able to capture this. So I see the first post request, I see an SQL query there, I see the select, and then I see another request immediately after that to machine2.aspx. What that actually is, and this is later I learned after research came out, is that the way that you could interact with machine2.aspx remotely is to use that DLL endpoint there. So that would, you hit that API endpoint, and then it makes a call internally to machine2.aspx with another SQL injection attempt. So with that there, if we go back to our rules here, both of these rules would have been triggered off of that exploitation. So just kind of reassures us that even though we didn't have any exploit code, we didn't know too much about this vulnerability, we were able to write rules to that little bit of data. And that's kind of like the main purpose that I wanted to get through this talk, is just things that I kept noticing. So kind of like a little wrap up of that, cool breeze in the heat. From early data to proven detection, our challenge was a new 0-day emerged, limited disclosure data. Our approach was to just take what we had, what was available to us, and create some rules. And then when the POC came out, we were able to confidently validate that our rules worked. And we know that we're protected, and we would have maybe saw something if, an anomaly of some sort, that we were able to confidently say that this is bad or this is good. Next, I wanted to talk about how I do some of this stuff locally. I run a lot of VMs. I have a little lab that I use. I create realistic testing environments. I mentioned earlier that sometimes I fake infrastructure. A really good thing of like running VMs and doing everything in a controlled environment is that you can keep POCs and exploit code contained within, to make sure you're not running exploit code on something that you didn't want to or wrecking anything. It allows us to capture data really easily with Wireshark or something like that. And sorry. So I'm like terrible at slides, and I had people review my slides on my team, so some things kind of changed. I'm a little off here. Yeah, pre-capture traffic associated with specific exploits can streamline incident response, facilitating faster identification and investigation. I'm going to go into how I use VMs to do all my testings on my local computer. Docker provides a great way to get a hold of software and quickly stand up things that will be used for testing. Licensed software is hard to get in my position because we're not a customer, and we're just, I'm a researcher, so sometimes I'll try to like sign up for the free trials and things like that, but it doesn't always work well. Excuse me. As a customer, or as someone using some of these softwares that you see have a new 0-day or a vulnerability, a lot of times before you patch, you should have backups, and those backups can help you do those those patch diffing that I mentioned. Let's see. Yeah, so the main thing I just want to get past is that we don't need the actual software to start running exploit code against. We can fake the infrastructure, and then I'm going to get into how we do that in this next slide here. So you can see that code. So this is just a glorified Python simple web server I made. Basically creates a custom HTTP handler that'll give custom responses to what you want based on your command line arguments. This is actually a snippet of something that I've been using. I have a little bit more refined version of it, but I just wanted to show what I started out with. So this is the Python web server that I use to fake responses. This is really helpful for exploit code that needs to have multiple steps involved in order to fully play out. And I want to keep it as like real world as possible because I am trying to emulate or simulate a threat. So sometimes I need to provide fake tokens, fake response codes, fake success criteria in the body, fake headers, form data, whatever the exploit code calls for. And we can put this to use here. So this is a CV that I actually worked on a couple of weeks ago. And I had some other CVs in here, but I wanted to stay more relevant. This is a Fortran file catalyst workflow vulnerability. This is some software that is paid, and I was unable to get a vulnerable version. I did sign up for a trial, but they were asking me a lot of things about the fake company that I made up, and I didn't have enough answers for them to give me a copy of it. So this was a perfect example to use some fake infrastructure. In this case, by the time I got this in my radar to create content for, there was already a POC available. You probably can't see any of that code, and I do have the link there. And in that POC code, if you go through it, it looks for things like tokens right away, and then certain success criteria in the response body. And that is what we can do with the Python web server that I created. I don't know if you can see that, but so this is a really janky way that I did this, and this is an actual screenshot of when I did it. So basically, I ran my Python server, gave it the response code of 200, and in this case, it was looking for an authorization token that I gave it a fake one there up top. It's kind of cut off a little bit, but there is an access token there. And then I would just kill it, Control-C, keyboard interrupt, and then do another one for the next part that the exploit code was going to go through. And each one was each request. I did have to do a little patching to that exploit code to add in some sleep time as I quickly killed that and then started it up again and just had it fully play out. Doing this allowed me to run Wireshark and capture all of that data, which I have in the next slide here. So yeah, you can see that. So here's what the data looked like in Wireshark. You can see the post and the GET request there. I can't see it from here, so I'm going to try to talk through it. But so both requests make the requests to the vulnerable software and the vulnerable endpoints. It's the workflow and the FTP servlet endpoints, which both were described in the CVE description. You can see there's also a command there at the end of the GET request to perform the ID command on the target. So now we know exactly what exploitation looks like over the wire. We can use this data to help create rules or validate existing rules. So just from that data, here's some of the rules that we can create. If we go through some of those, the top one's a snort rule, basically looking for that directory traversal attempt. There's the vulnerable endpoint workflow servlet, FTP servlet. We can also see the command injection attempt there. And the way that, so I had links that I wanted to pull up and talk through, but I'm not going to mess with this presenter mode here. But basically, anything, what was it? So command equals down there in the third one, that's that green one there. So anything that's going to that endpoint that has at the end command equals, we're going to try to alert on. So it doesn't matter what command's being ran, we're going to set an alert. Same thing with the Yara rule right below that. All right, and here is the next vulnerability, which is the Team City JetBrains vulnerability. I'm sure some of you heard about it just more recently. This time with a somewhat open source software in Team City. Being able to use Docker makes my job a whole lot easier. In this case, I was able to stand up a vulnerable version by running a Docker pull, and also POC code was also available. Had a link there too that I'm not going to click on, but you can see some of that code. But in there just kind of explains what it is and what's going on. And this is just a screenshot of doing the Docker build there, and then just running through a few prompts to set up Team City. It was pretty easy. I think this whole process took about 10 minutes. So it's something easy to do that you can easily adapt into your day-to-day. And then when we run the exploit code against our Team City server, we can see from the user's dashboard that we were able to successfully create a new admin user threat hunter. So yeah, this is mainly what I do most of the time, and then just create that packet capture, which I show in the next one here. So while we do that, we capture the network traffic to get a real exploitation attempt in Wireshark. Each one of the requests contains data that we can use to, again, create detection rules or even validate existing rules. We see that we have everything that was mentioned in the blog and contained in the POC. The blog is the thing I didn't get to click on, but in the blog it did mention that git/pwn, basically it could be anything. It just has to be a non-existent endpoint. And then after that, you need a JSP query, and then that query can then equal to something that you can access unauthenticated. That unauthenticated access allowed us to hit API endpoints to create a new admin user. So that's all in our packet capture. And so now again, we can create snort and Yara rules that we know indicate exploitation attempt. We have the juicy endpoint and the techniques to exploit defined in our rules to look for anything before the JSP query to any other endpoint which an attacker can access unauthenticated. Yeah, I can kind of talk through these. So yeah, the first one's a snort rule. We look for anything before that JSP query, and then anything after that. So it'll just show us any kind of access to anything, basically, whether it's authenticated or not. We want to see it all. And then the second one is a Yara rule. And these are all these snort and Yara rules that I've been sharing are just very simple. In my job, I don't have to do this too often, but I actually utilize Gemini to help write a lot of these, which utilizing AI helped a lot for this talk. And I don't know if you noticed, some of the images that I used were, I forgot to mention, were generated from Gemini, some of those goofy alien ones and stuff like that. All right, and then kind of just a wrap up. 0 days are inevitable. Even with the best defenses, like they're going to emerge. Threat actors are constantly trying to develop new exploits and only have to get it right once. Like Dual Core said, connect to the internet and someone's going to own it. Disclosure data early on is almost always going to be very limited. Vendors that are supplying detection rules are doing very similar things with these disclosures when these disclosures happen. So a lot of things that I went through about doing patch diffing and all that stuff, or just even taking like little clues here and there, that's what they're using to create their rules. So if you can do this yourself, you can start testing out their rules too, because a lot of times in my job of doing validation, I do find that some vendor rules don't hit on certain exploits, or I know for a fact that I exploited something. I have the proof and it didn't trigger anything. Sometimes we do look at existing like snort rules to try to help develop our own content. Oftentimes we get a little hung up in that and see that their rules are very, very specific to one attack, and that's not a really good way to go about detections. So yeah, and then another point I wanted to make is to not get hung up on searching for the entire answer and work with what you have. I think it's a very like hacker mindset to kind of take little clues or little things that are available to you and do things with that maybe the person who put those out there didn't think you could actually do. Like I mentioned, just giving little, this is a SQL injection affecting this endpoint. Well, with that we can do a lot. Community is strength. I get some much more insight and clues just by people sharing on Twitter their own research, or even just talking about things. And I can use that in my day-to-day job to figure out how I'm going to maybe create something that I know for sure will help customers validate their own detections. So yeah, I went through that really fast. Apologize, but I did make it to my question slide. I don't know if there's any Corky Romano fans. It's kind of, I use these references from that movie all the time, but people tend not to get it. But yeah, so is there any questions? Yeah.
You mentioned patch diffing. Do you find like a lot of closed source vendors obfuscating their changes, or when they so that like proof of concepts and detections are just much harder?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was kind of tough for me to find something that I could talk about. A lot of times, so I do have access to Mandiant intel, and we do have a lot of intel, and a lot of times they have data that shows exploitation, so that's where I usually go to, but that doesn't help for a customer. But I did pick the MoveIt transfer vulnerability because, like I mentioned, it was .NET, and it was easy to decompile and then look at that. But when you're dealing with obfuscated stuff, like it becomes impossible almost. I personally haven't seen like vendors attempt to obfuscate it too much so that you couldn't discover what it is. I have seen vendors silently patch things and not tell anybody about it, and then in that patch data, researchers saw doing the exact same thing, doing patch diffing, and like, wait a minute, like, why are you guys removing this function here? You didn't mention anything about that. So I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think I remember recalling reading Microsoft just put a fix into their software, but it would be like several DLLs and whatever this was, just so that I'm assuming just so proof of concepts couldn't be written for something that wasn't there's no 0-day exploit, but just there was obviously a vulnerability within the software.
Yeah, I would say bigger vendors like Microsoft and even Google will not share this stuff, or try to hide it a lot, or make it harder for threat actors to create POC code and stuff like that. Yep. Any other questions? Yep.
How do you keep your rules clean? So you got Yara, you got Snort, and then the attackers and control sets are always going to have
Yeah, so in my day-to-day, I don't have to write too many rules. I want to include that because I know that's what comes out of the work that I do. I just have to write sometimes little YAR rules or snort rules, like I mentioned, very high level, and just making sure that I'm looking at the correct endpoints and looking for any, like I mentioned, the SQL injection attempts. Keep it very, very high level, and then I can run that against like Mandiant's intelligence, what we have, like what data we have. I can test that out and see if like I'm hitting on tons of stuff, then I know it's not a clean rule, and I can kind of trickle down. So that's kind of a process which we're getting more involved with doing, but not so much right now. Any other questions? Yeah.
So you work on a big dedicated team, or a big team that's dedicated to this kind of work, but if I wanted to apply some of these methodologies that you mentioned, what would be some of the low-hanging fruit to start with?
Open source software, and even so, WordPress is a great way to practice this kind of stuff. Yeah, so sometimes like when I do have downtime and I'm trying to like refine the processes, I will pick WordPress stuff because there's a new vulnerable plugin for WordPress like almost every week. And yeah, having that open source stuff really helps you practice with this, practice the patch diffing, and yeah.
So the threat intel community is kind of interesting in terms of you guys are probably operating off of a lot of very similar channels, whether ranging all the way from white hat to public. Do you have any rules about what you disclose in those forums?
So like personally, do I disclose things or?
What is your ethics around kind of like the disclosure, whether it's like what you're gathering from Twitter to what you contribute back?
Okay, so I'm not allowed to contribute too much back, so I don't run into that problem too often. But I do work kind of closely with some of the Google zero-day teams, and they have kind of this, I guess, like rule of thumb that they're trying, or these rules they're trying to implement right now. If anyone's familiar with Maddie Stone, she kind of leads that team and that effort, and they want to give vendors like 60 days to patch, and then after that 60 days, they want to reveal all the information that they can. That way, other people can look at that and be more safe or create rules or understand what's going on with this vulnerability. Answer your question? Okay. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you for coming to my talk. Sorry I went a little bit fast. I'm a little tired still from the casino night. Yeah, I don't know, did you guys see some of those attempts like that people were doing to take stuff? Like, I was at a blackjack table and we're just sitting there playing and no one knew this was happening, and a guy just walks over behind the dealer and just trips and falls and kind of starts seizuring out on the floor. The dealer turns around immediately and we all just grabbed a ton of chips, and I don't know if he's hearing this talk at all, but that was great. And it's funny because he didn't mention it to anybody, but everyone knew exactly what to do as soon as he went down. Yeah, it was great. Yeah, it was Roy was the dealer. He was an older gentleman like dealing. I felt so bad because he was so concerned for the person that just fell. But yeah, all right. Well, thanks everybody.